Hello.
Hello.
Is my voice okay? I think my camera's kind of stuttering.
You're fine.
Yeah.
Alrighty. How's everyone today?
Okay, you're echoing. Yeah, somebody needs to turn off their YouTube.
I don't think it's me. Is it better now?
Did I have?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Oh, is it me?
Hello.
Hey Ben, we're all just checking our sound.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure who it is. That's. Yeah, I think it is you, Elijah.
Oh, really? Huh. I don't have it open. I guess I'll just leave and come back.
Here, I've closed everything.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. That's me being stupid.
He missed hearing you say that.
Yeah, that was just me being stupid. I had my YouTube on this computer, not that computer.
Ah.
And wrong. Thank you very much for clarifying that. If you hadn't said you weren't hearing an echo, I wouldn't have realized what was wrong. Ben, you're growing a beard. You're becoming like a rabbi.
I'm experimenting. Yeah, I never. Sorry.
Just as long as your wife doesn't mind.
Yeah, no, she's into the experiment. I can never. This is as long maybe that I've had it, but it grows kind of weird. It's like it's the same way that my hair grows. Kind of grows because kind of like out. Part of my Persian roots, I think, like this, like very thick. But yeah.
You poor thing, Persian.
Yeah. There's the pros and cons.
Sandy, you haven't been around for a while.
Oh, well, I've kind of been around, but I haven't jumped into any conversations. No, sorry.
Oh, okay. No, I was just wondering where you were. What was up with you?
It's been a busy week. Yeah, a little bit too much hanging out on Paul Vanderklay's side of the world.
Oh, CRC Voices?
Yeah. Plus, also, I was. It's one of those weird weeks. This makes 4 days in a row. I drove down to see my ex, not on purpose. 4 days in a row, just kind of. I agreed to take him down like an hour south to Mississauga to his hobby shop and stop in to see our son. We forgot his wheelchair cushion at the Tim Hortons. We stopped at to have coffee, I went back so maybe it was only 3 days. What day are we on? Thursday.
Elijah, it was completely my fault. I'm sorry. I was doing something stupid.
Yeah.
All right.
Anywho, yeah, so I've kind of been hanging around with my ex 3 days in a row for, a few unplanned reasons. But luckily his wheelchair seat was found by the lovely young man at the Tim Hortons who said, "I think I see it in the parking lot." So yeah, that was good. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's all you, Elijah.
Yep.
It's all me. You guys filled the air. Thank you. All right, everybody. Welcome back to another instantiation of the Jewish Book Club. We read The Halakhic Man, pages 13 to 29 this week. One of our fellow book club members, Nathaniel, he has a lot of sick family this week, so he will not be joining us. But I think we should probably keep his family in our prayers. Hope they get better. All right. Maybe one comment I think from last week. I'm pretty sure it's Rav Hirsch. That thing was Derek Torin Derek Eretz, not Slovakian. That was maybe the only kind of issue from last week. Other than that, I think that those of us who read these chapters this week would had a little bit of an easier time as opposed to last week. Last week was very, intense. Well, I think this one was a little bit more narrative driven. I guess we can go kind of our likes and dislikes and then see where the thing takes us. I thought it was nice that we finally got a taste of what the Rav thought the Halakhic Man was. That was good. And then I think it was also nice to kind of see how he approaches it via like this idealized world. And I know in one of the notes last week he kind of mentions that. And then so it's kind of nice to see him bring it out more.
Yeah.
Anybody else who wants to give their little first reaction to our section?
Go ahead, Sandy, if you have anything.
I'm just smiling at myself because I'm still struggling with my dictionary and a ton of words that I have to look up. And then, yeah. I think I'm going to try and get my ex-husband to read it with me. Dyslexic carpenter, and I read him a couple of paragraphs, and then he immediately explains them to me because he actually enjoys philosophy and stuff, things. I'm like, great. He said, that was really interesting. That's easy. Okay, good. So, but I did also like, I liked that I got a better sense. I realized I was kind of way off what I thought Halakhic Man was going to be, how different he was going to be to either of the other two, in a sense, even though he's like them. So I'm learning some new things. Go for it, Ben. You probably have more intelligent things to comment on than I did.
I don't know about that. But I mean, I agree with. It was nice to get like an example or kind of get more concrete about, like you said, like the ideal, or kind of get some sense of where the rubber meets the road. I mean, I can definitely see those two, or there's three figures, map them onto people that I know, or people that that were discussed, or like personas that were discussed, that are discussed in our corner. So, or in general. So it was interesting to hear that. It was definitely, I think the main thing that kind of like stuck to me in terms of the question that seems to be like the problem nexus is this idea of like, he says, and we can get into it later as well, because this is page 29, but it says like, Halakhic man does not despair. The question is like, when do you not despair? There's like a flexibility there in terms of like, we should probably like explain in terms of the Halakhic man is more flexible, like the religious. I feel like you could make a better use of better explain this better, but like the religious man is more inflexible, or has his own ideal, and then the cognitive man is trying to be more strict in a different way, and then the Halakhic man is more flexible. The question is like, where is this flexibility? Like, when are you flexible and when are you not? And that's still kind of up in the air for me. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say I really like your comment, Ben? I can really relate to that.
For sure. And I think one interesting thing about the Halakhic Man kind of section then is that that's kind of what you were talking about to me last week, right? Where you have your one thing and you use that to guide you for everything else. That's pretty much exactly what the Rav is saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're more
Yeah, that's
Jewish
what
than
I
you
felt.
think.
Like, yeah, it's kind of like a continuation of what we talked about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of nice that we were like understanding where he was going. Um, yeah, to kind of though continue with what you were saying about despair, that was also kind of striking because last week in note 4, at the top of what page was it? Yeah, kind of like the note 4, roughly at the top of like 140. He talks about how like the religious experience is not like easy.
Right.
So then for then him to say, "Oh, like being a halakhic man, no despair," I was like, I don't know about this, man. So that seemed
Yeah.
a bit strange. Because it almost seems like in some ways he's saying like because the halakhic man is closer to the cognitive man, that like some of the like emotional problems that come from being like religious don't apply, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I didn't fully grasp.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. Like, yeah, I get there is a paradox there. I feel there is something that seems like a paradox. I wonder. I remember at the Chabad that I go to sometimes. There's the rabbi was talking something about anger, and I might not be saying what he's saying right, but it was saying about how anger is not something. It's like it's the wrong reaction to have for, I don't know if it was like unequivocal for everything or for most things, because it's basically like you should have the perspective that everything has a purpose for something. So it's like it shouldn't be something that's out of your expectation, because it's not for you to expect. You don't know what's going to happen, or there is a plan for everything. So your anger assumes, oh, I should have gotten something out of the, like I should have gotten something. Like I know exactly what I should have, like what the result should have been, and it wasn't that, and that's why I'm angry. So I wonder if like despair is, that's what he means by that, is like um
Well,
different than
so
just yeah.
so anger definitely, like Nachmanides in his letter to his son says, you should never get angry, and the sages say anyone who gets angry, it's all manner of hell rule over him. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't sometimes show anger. You should never
Mhm.
be angry though, and there's a distinction there. Um, and as far as despair, I'm guessing that the word that they're translating as despair is yush. And so this is, I mean, so the Rabbi Soloveitchik, in a sense, is writing kind of a response to Tanya, which is the main Chabad um, philosophical work. And Tanya contrasts two very important things, which is you might become careless, or you might become like if you're not properly oriented in the world. There's two things you might fall into, which is to not care, and the word is holalut, to be uh, hedonistic, or atzvut, which is to become depressed because you feel that you have no capacity to do anything in life, become nihilistic. So I guess like hedonism versus nihilism. And I think while the Rav isn't exactly using the same terms, I think he's addressing the same problems. And so when he says despair, I think he means yush, which is to give up.
Yeah, something with surrender. Yeah, it seems like that. Yeah.
Is give up okay. I know for myself for a number of years, but this is coming out of, I don't know the Jewish context for that. I only know from the Christian context, the different uses of the word surrender, or I relate surrender to almost to submit to give over to, or to, but I'm not. What's the other word you used, Jacob? Give up, to surrender or give up. But are those the same thing? I don't think so.
No, and I think, I mean, this is part of what it gets into. Like in Jewish philosophy, we use the same words, in Hebrew that you can refer to from biblical concepts, and so this concept I keep on calling it Yush, right? So to be ma'ayesh is to, for example, if you had just given up on that wheelchair seat, right? That would be called yush. You're like, oh, I'll never be able to get it back, right? As opposed to what you're calling in Hasidism is usually referred to as bitul, or even more generally in Judaism, kibul ol. Bitul is nullification of the self, and kibul ol is to accept the yoke of heaven upon yourself. And those are definitely good things, but that's not nihilism.
No, that's why I asked, for practical reasons as well as for religious curiosity or whatever. Those sort of things have mattered to me for a long time, and that's kind of what I almost can sense the distinction in them just from places lived where I have tangible examples, but I remember them more as tactile memories of events or things that have happened more than kind of just in here where I put words to it. Yeah, nihilism that's got to be an absolutely terrible thing. When you mentioned the seat, I remember my ex John was saying to me, he said, what did he say? I remember I laughed because he had immediately assumed that we were not going to find it. And it looked like that was going to be the case, because when I asked Google to help me find the phone number to call, the first 2 times I looked, I couldn't find it. So I tried calling some other places in the same location to see if they were open. And then eventually I went back and we went out to a bigger map. He said, well, go out to the bigger map. And when we looked at the Google map of the entire town and we sort of narrowed it down, we found out the name of the plaza in which it was. And then somehow I was able to find it that way. That wasn't because I'm super intelligent for doing things. And we kind of blended how we both approach things. But I laughed and I said to him, I don't know that he said, you're very persistent or something. And I said, well, I think I'm just Scottish and stubborn. I just didn't want to give in to thinking that it was completely impossible just because I couldn't find a phone number, so, but I feel like there's too many times in life where we've gone up against something and to wait for heaven to provide an answer, to wait for that opportunity for something to happen. It feels like it takes 10 times the effort than giving up, even if it's only like minimally more effort. And so that really grabs me when I read things like this. It's not as hard as it seems, and yet it's almost feels impossible at times. Does that make any sense? I don't know if I made any sense. But the whole difference between, I just keep coming back to that despair, or the fact that the Halakhic man seems to expect that there's that the possible is out there somewhere, that there's. Now I'm going to stop there. You guys go on with something intelligent, and I'm going to keep thinking.
It's intelligence, Andy. Don't dismiss
I
it.
know. I've been told I have to stop doing that. Yeah.
But I think that in some ways what you were saying correlates with a statement that on page 21, where it says, it is not anything transcendent that creates holiness, but rather the visible reality, the regular cycle of the natural order. And I thought that was kind of interesting, because that seems, I don't know, it kind of goes against like the intrinsic understanding, right, of holiness, where holiness is something that like God does, right? God imbues in something, and that's what makes it holy, as opposed to like, I guess, just the natural order. And it seems to me almost what that statement is saying is that like we make things holy, right? Like by recognizing it. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I was just this related comment of I think about like the blessing. It's, I mean, the Jewish blessing would be literally, I mean, you can literally translate it to, I mean, you bring the holiness from the source of the holiness. So so you bless it. I mean, you perform the act, but you kind of like, and it emanates from above, but you need to, but you, when you say it, you bring it from the source. You say Baruch atah Adonai, so blessed are you. Why would you tell God that he's blessed? Like he knows, or he doesn't need to know that he's blessed. But you just mentioned he is the source of the blessing, and then you pull it down into the food that you eat, the mountains that you see, and the things like that. So I found like that kind of relates to what you just said.
Yeah, the root of the word Baruch is actually Berach. It means knee. So
right, something with a camel, right?
Right, and so you bring it down, right? When you say a blessing, and that's really what you're doing, is you're taking the profane and you're turning it holy, right? And this is the idea of like the 6 days of the work week, which are profane, and then you spend the 6 days bringing things, preparing things for Shabbat, and then you're actually allowed to take in Shabbat a little early, because you're sanctifying a part of those last few hours.
Yeah, and it reminded me too of, I had to find it. It's Leviticus 10:3, after the naughty boy Cohens decide to bring foreign fire. Verse 3, it says, and then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what Hashem meant by saying, through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory before all people." So, yeah.
Yeah. Sandy, to what you said, I wanted to say that, first of all, like the persistence thing or holding something is true. I feel like that's directly related to what we spoke about last time. And also, I feel like the Rav kind of talks about it here, and like in page 29, he mentioned this example of the mathematicians discovering something, right? The non-Euclidean math, and that didn't correspond with reality as they knew it, as we knew it at that time. But they were like, you know what? Let's just work with that in mind, with that theory in mind, and I keep working on it. And then at some point, people actually found that useful, right? So they were persistent about just like, and that's kind of like, it's also interesting about the Halakhic man, and like a very interesting trade-off there is you don't want to be too insular in your, like, I feel like that's also something that I when I view Judaism, that is one thing from the outside of being somebody that was more secular before, particularly in Judaism. I can sense that this is something that I'm kind of like hesitant about. Of like, I see religious Jews and some of them are kind of just are very insular. So how do you hold on to your ideal, but also don't, you avoid that insularity or being in that bubble?
I have to think about that.
So
That's like one of the big questions of Judaism, and has been for like is
Yeah.
you know, and Paul Vanderklay talks about similar things when he talks about like the estuary in the walled garden, right? There's a question of, okay, and I guess Jordan Peterson as well, like, okay, when do you explore unmapped territory and when do you stay safe? And really, I would say, like, I guess when Vervaeke says you always have to be that zone of up, like you get in the zone when you're just a little bit beyond that border, right? And I would actually say that's kind of like, that twilight on Friday when you're bringing Shabbat in, right?
It looks like I didn't share this, but I read an interesting article by Joseph Breuer, who was part of the Rav Hirsch's kind of, I don't know, dynasty, and he wrote an interesting article about like schooling and the type of schooling that you should have, whether it's like I guess Haredi kind of like only Torah education versus the kind of Hirschian like mixed education. And he talks about how, like, kind of in similar fashion to what you were saying, Ben, and then also what the Rav is saying, is that like I think that their understanding is like you actually want to like take these ideas from Judaism and actually like enact them in the world, right? And like engage in things instead of just saying like, well, let's just re-put up the ghetto walls, and just be like insular. And that like it's almost like best served when you actually like, I don't know, engage in things rather than just like kind of hoarding it. I don't know if that's kind of related to what you were saying, but it was just an interesting little piece. I'll try and remember to share it.
Yeah.
I have I don't know, I probably have a strange question. When you were talking about God's holiness, and then, like, we were talking about Jacob was talking about like the camel, but that in the sense of bringing like the profane, you're I wasn't thinking of things quite that way. I was thinking of holiness, and one of my questions right already at that point was, is holiness alone by itself still the same kind of holiness, or is holiness what it is because of that sense of respect, participation, that entering into it from another? And when you were talking about the walled garden, I was suddenly thinking of Song of Solomon, and like the description of the bride that way, and that sense of purity. And I was thinking, but it's not that you stay shut up. I mean, even in our sense of wanting to protect our own sense of holiness, our own sense of, and maybe it's partly because of what I'm watching go through, like sort of on this other group where I've been talking about things in the CRC Voices and stuff, and you've got wildly different opinions of things. And what they were doing this week was they were talking and saying, well, they're turning to look to the middle to, pretty much the people that are inside the walls been established on both sides of it. And I'm thinking, well, but what do you actually have to offer? But to look to what is outside as well. Like, in and of myself, I'm not holy. I can't possibly be holy, just from sitting and reading the Bible. I have to interact and engage with the Word of God. I have to engage with God in those places. And the comment about when it's, there was something you asked, Ben. I'm sorry. I'm gonna claim old brain, because I lose things very quickly. But it really struck me. I was thinking that, what do you do when something's not safe? I go back to thinking about my son. I never particularly, I didn't feel like God gave us our son because we already had sat down, happened to work in the field, and we're completely prepped and ready to take on the kinds of things he brought into our life. You become ready by engaging with, which is something kind of like I feel like when I'm reading, and I borrowed the book out of the library. I wasn't coping with the non-tangible. I like being able to glance up and down the page and look between the pages. And I feel like if I pick the book up and this is something that where I want to find God, and I want to find the relationship we all have with God in a place where we're called to look at ourselves and see whether we're like cognitive man, whether we're like the homo religiosus, the religious man. He mentioned somewhere in the text another theoretical or theological or something, man. And I was like, oh, okay. So he's describing all the aspects of what we are when we aren't Halakhic man. But we all have the opportunity to be. We all get to choose to enter into and engage with. And, we have that possibility of being. And I don't know, I just feel like your questions had me thinking about that. And yeah, I just feel like I can sit and read this book, but until we all talk about it, it expands. The moment we start to actually share, ask questions, and talk about it, and just see what's really grabbed hold of us, then whatever we've actually brought to the table this week becomes more, even if it's what we still came with. And I feel like holiness is kind of that same place where God is so, he's holy, but we get to enter into that place with him and bring our own profanity. We are, people made by God, but we have so many profane elements to ourselves. But he doesn't ask us not to. He just says to bring them. I'm finding this a weird place, and kind of very different than I've heard a lot of this taught before. Even though I love this book. I really do. I have got to get a copy of it.
Yeah. I'm trying to pick on the thread of what you said, especially at the end, in terms of like you want to participate in what is holy, or it can't be just within yourself solely. So I want to say something like there are conditions for how to interact. There are conditions for how you interact with holiness, right? Even like in Judaism, in terms of like you have to have 10 men to say certain prayers, or if you want to say a blessing, I would like if I don't have a kippah, but I would go like this, or I put a napkin if I'm like at a table, I would do this, and that's the condition. If I want to interact with holiness, if I want to grab it from above, I need to act in a certain way. I need to be in a certain fashion. So, yeah.
Have you ever seen people where they like take their shirt and they put it over their heads because they're not wearing
the hand thing doesn't actually work. You can't use your own hand. You can use your sleeve, but you can't use your hand. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. I've done many things. The napkin, the hand. I think maybe I've done this, or I've seen people do this in the past.
Yeah,
there are variations.
Yeah, that I've been, because a lot of people don't realize that actually you can be a completely observant Orthodox Jew, and in certain places you would not wear a yarmulke. You would not cover your head, at least with a yarmulke, or because that would give people false impressions and stuff like that. So, yeah.
So I guess maybe one other interesting thing related to some of the discussion that Jacob was having earlier is this interesting part on page 24 where he says many of the greatest halakhic men avoided and still avoid serving in rabbinical posts. They rather join themselves to the group of those who are reluctant to render practical decisions, which I thought was very poignant for
Yeah.
they were having arguments on the Discord about.
Well, okay, I have to say that there's a difference between a rabbinic post and rendering decisions, and what's going on my Discord, which is we have 3 guys who just like to get away with not being afforded the respect that they deserve, because they're like, oh, I'm not a rabbi. So this is the thing. Okay, they get called rabbis, and they're like, the only reason they're not taking the test to become rabbis is because they want to be able to say, I'm not a rabbi.
Mm-mm.
But people call them rabbis anyway. And that was the, so it one thing I have to note, there were very, very prominent people who never actually got rabbinic ordination, including the Chazon Ish. Like, he was one of the most prominent rabbis, and he was a great posek, but he never got ordained.
Is it because they don't want to be pinned down? Like, I mean, like if they have a rabbi title, somebody could say, well, the rabbi said that, right? And they want to be theoretical. They want to be able to explore, to think outside the box, to bring things from this, from there. Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I think by the time you're the Chazon Ish, you're already, like, yeah.
Who can even give you smicha at that point in time, right?
So there's a famous story, the Chafetz Chaim, who was a great, well-known rabbi, and like great leader. He needed to get a passport, and on the application it asked occupation, and he refused to fill it out with rabbi without getting smicha. So he actually had to get smicha in order to fill it out.
I guess. Oh, you can go back.
I didn't say anything. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I think that one interesting thing, I guess, related to this, where I kind of would disagree with the Rav, I think that he's using mathematician when he should be using physicist or something like that sometimes, because I think that here his kind of comparison to like a mathematician is more, I don't know, poignant or apropos, because it seems like to me that, part of what he's saying is that for the halakhic man, like, I think, Jacob, were you saying something that like one of the signs of like a great rabbi is like being able to come up with new questions, right? And I think that that's also something that's like, very mathematical, where it's like, yeah, sure, like, prime numbers are interesting for like computer science encryption applications, but like, I just don't really care. I just care about prime numbers because they're prime numbers, and like that's cool. Where I feel like the halakhic man is also like, I may come up or try and study something like, the temple services and all these things that have no, let's say, practical application, but I enjoy them or love them simply because I do. I know. I felt like a lot of things that I get called to in life are kind of like that. They have no practical application, but for some reason I just like them.
Well, that's actually really interesting in terms of, like you say, they have no practical applications, but you love them. I actually find that really interesting because I had a question about, and this is very basic, but I feel like I really want to dive into this in terms of like, why is it so important to dive into those things, specifically like why is learning so important, like in Judaism, for example, like why do you need to learn and to lishanen, like to like memorize would be wrong, but like why do you need to learn so much? Like what is the importance of that? Why is the emphasis? And part of it is like this, like what you said, like seems like some people like it, or it is as if it's like sort of like not an intuition, but something like I just like it, I can't explain. But I'm curious about what's that,
I
how
know.
people explain that or explore that.
Like for me, I think there's something about like let's say you go to your wife and your wife asks you like, why do you love me, right? And you lay out like a rational list, right? You're like, I like you because you make a really good kugel,
Yeah,
or your
feature list.
cholent is the best, right? Like when you say all those things, you're kind of like, okay, like, I don't know, like, but if you tell somebody like irrationally, it's like, I don't know, like, I don't know, like there almost is like, it's like super rational, right? Like it's beyond rationality, and where you just love it. And I guess like for me, the interesting thing about Judaism, and I don't want to like misrepresent Christianity or something like that, but I feel like, the question, you'll see people like, oh, Eruz, like, aren't you like cheating God, right? Where like I feel like almost the Jewish response is something like, no, like you gain closeness by like engaging in something, like by trying to learn God's law just because you want to learn God's law, like that's your ultimate expression of love, right? And like, I don't know, like loving something just because you just love it and you're like interested in all the ins and outs, even if it doesn't have any practical purpose, like, you know that's like, what does knowing your wife's favorite color mean? Like maybe you buy like nice curtains, right? Like, I don't know, but if you know, or like, what did they do on their like seventh birthday? That's not useful. But knowing it, or like actually doing it for some reason, like even though it's kind of useless or irrational or non-purposeful knowledge, like the fact that you care about it is and are interested in it is like, I don't know, just seems like the ultimate expression of love in some regards.
Right.
I was thinking very similar. The word I was going to that and maybe that comes from my recent the relationship that with the gentleman that I lost. We would talk sometimes about the ways you celebrate each other, and so when you ask that, when Elijah's talking about, what's the purpose of knowing your wife's favorite color? In a sense, I think finding out a small detail and just smiling at knowing it is a form of celebration. And the same thing can apply to God. Just simply wanting to look into God's word simply because it's his word. And there might be something in there that just makes your heart burst with like, wow, to know that about him. That's a way of celebrating him. And that reminds me of you talking about, blessings and how you bless and yeah, there's definitely something there to that that question. Yeah.
So now I'm reminded about I was seeing a video about how you have in Judaism you have laws that are specific you have laws that come from the Torah and they're specific. Let's say like Passover, like what do you do with the Passover, the Paschal Lamb, and all the leavened bread and stuff like that. And then there are laws that are derived from the oral Torah, the Halakha. So there's like these two levels. And let's say I'm going to abbreviate, but let's say then you have like tradition, and tradition is just the things that maybe it's like different communities of Jews. Like the Persian Jews would have some things that they do, and then some European Jews would have like different things that they do, but that's part of their masoret, their tradition. And in some way, this rabbi that I heard this from was saying that really it's like if you want to know a secret, it's the masoret, it's the tradition that it's like it's the most elevated, because those are the things that even though God didn't tell you need to do it, or even though God didn't explicitly say it, or even didn't even hint on it, you went and you figured out what he wanted, and you said, I will do this for you even though you didn't even hint me, right? So this is kind of like your relationship with your wife or husband, where you would, like, she doesn't need to say anything, she doesn't need to hint at it even, right? She doesn't need to look at the watch at the store and say, oh, this is really lovely. She would just say something. You would just do it for her without anything that was mentioned.
So I was just checking to make sure that this was part of the reading right now, and it is on page 25. And I guess this is what you guys were talking about. But on page 25, he quotes a section of Tanya, which, I mean, in this book, for him to at length quote a section of Tanya is actually and this may be one of the most famous, in fact, it probably is the most famous section of Tanya, right? And it says, when a person understands and grasps any halacha in the Mishnah or Gemara, that's the Talmud, fully and clearly, and now this halacha is the wisdom and will of the Holy One, blessed be He. For it is His will that in case Reuben pleads thus, for example, and Simon thus, the decision should be thus. So this is before a rabbinic court, right? Reuben and Shimon, which is basically Tom, Dick, and Harry in Jewish terms, right? So Tom and Harry come to a court, and one of them says this, and one of them says that, and when a decision is made in that rabbinic court, this becomes God's will manifest on earth. And even if such a case involving these particular pleas never came before a court and will never come, nevertheless, since it has been the will and the wisdom of the Holy One, blessed be He, that in case a person pleads thus and another person pleads thus, then the decision shall be thus. Therefore, when a person knows and grasps with his intellect this decision in accordance with the laws as set forth in the Mishnah, Gemara, or codes, he thereby comprehends, grasps, and encompasses with his intellect the will and wisdom of the Holy One, blessed be He, whom no thought can grasp at all. So this is how we in our mind are able to grasp a tiny bit of God in understanding what His will is on earth. Somebody has something to say. Come on.
Oh, I don't know if this is something to say, but when I was listening to you read, sometimes, and you hear other people do that too, but sometimes when you are speaking to something of God that has like this, where you have seen something, you know, it has a context for you. And in that context, I was talking earlier about how something becomes bigger when we know it and you share it and stuff. I can hear in your voice, you know, how that sort of expands within you to know this, to appreciate it, and then to share it. And that's all. That's just what I was thinking, listening to you. I had to go back. I noticed that before, but I don't have your context. And that just grew in size and in importance. And just to say that God, or as you say that here, and I even hear you when you say the Holy One, blessed be He. There's years that go into you saying that. That's not you reading words off a page the way I could read it, not knowing, because I'm not Jewish and because I don't have the background and because there is something to just hearing that I can hear years of life and experience and relationship. And just coming from sharing that with us. And that is planned for in context, just in case. We might not be in court, but I think even here, just in case something is, it's like to the earlier question, this is not something that we do or know or say or live because it's useless and we just enjoy it. It has that existence within us, and I can hear it in Jacob's relationship to it.
Before I forget, Sandy, you said you got Halakhic Man at the library. Like, does your local library have Halakhic Man, or they have to special order it? Okay.
No, I being Scottish, stubborn, persistent, and wanting to find it. I asked Dr. Google how I could do that. Researched where it might possibly be in interlibrary loans, looked up one that was actually where I used to live, laughed and called my local library, because this would be like in my teens, used to live there, and said, hey, I want you to call such and such a library that's in such and such a town and ask them and let them know I want to borrow this book on interlibrary loan. And they're like, we don't see it in our system. I said, no, but I can telling you exactly where you're going to find it.
So, I mean, part of me, I mean, this is why, like, when Elijah said he wanted to study Halakhic Man, I was like, well, okay, because I have to say, like, this, as much as I do love, I mean, I don't read books twice almost ever. And this is one of the few books that I've read twice. But at the same time, it's a book I've never been able to feel like I can share even with religious Jews that much, because it just requires so much, right? You have to both know Hegel and like some Talmud, and like I just, so part of like the whole thing with this book club is I'm just wondering like how you guys are seeing this, how you're reading this, because like you can translate Reuben and Simon, right? Reuben and Shimon to English, but like the context that they're before a rabbinic court, like how do you get that?
I don't get it in any logical sense that you could probably track. It's no more logical than me saying you're going to call such and such a library and you're going to tell them I want to borrow the book from them. It's a place of deep trust I've always lived with God that's never quite fit in my usual, like in my contexts, like I went to church for 25 years with a bunch of farmers and blue collar workers. And, like I'm having fun because I'm getting to actually listen to people that are very intelligent talking about something that's super interesting. And I'm not having to sit there and be the teacher in the women's coffee break group and go over the same, not that there was stupid people there, I don't mean that, but we would invite people in who didn't know, anything. And so you're speaking to those people. And to just be able to bite into something, and really realize how very little I might know. And then I'm going down, how am I reacting to this book? It has me excited. I'm going and talking to my ex about it, and I'm calling and I'm asking him questions because he's the guy that memorized Calvin's Institutes. I never even read it. And I'm learning things about him and his take on things and how he values the Jewish perspective, and has been wondering why on earth it's not much more prevalent than it is in Christian contexts, as a very necessary background to anything that we talk about. And And I'm realizing I've probably leaned a lot more towards the religious man than I like over the years. And it makes me appreciate all of the hard things I went through with my son. You know, it's kind of like that when you speak about the oral history, the oral law, whatever, like the just that part of it, you know, or when you talk about tradition, Ben, you know, and you say like there's these levels of things, and that's what I'm getting out of struggling through this. Every week or every day I sit and I read this thing and I think I'm never going to be able to say anything in group because I don't understand more than this much. And every week, like this is the second week we've had conversation, and you guys bring things up that speak to the things I've thought about and think are useless for talking about. So they're obviously not. And our lives are part of engaging with God and his world, just like Jacob reading this portion about the court. You go to court. I mean, I almost did go to court with my ex. We have a whole lot of weird history behind us, you know, and in the last 6 months, you know, I mean, yeah, we went through a difficult divorce, but we're kind of becoming friends, talking about some of the horrible things, the things that should be discouraging us that are going on in our denomination, and the things that, you know, we didn't really manage to talk to each other about, and how differently we perceived the important parts of faith. This book has a lot of life in it. That's all I got.
Yeah, I feel like we're meeting it. At least for me, like I'm meeting it at my level. Like, I mean, even Jacob just now expanding on it and giving the example of the court and how it was like directly related to the example that I mentioned. When I read this in the book, I did not think about that, even though it was in my head somewhere, but I didn't connect that. So, but it's there somewhere. I always find that interesting in terms of it's how you view things. Like you can see the same thing and two people will get different things from it, and I can see that clearly even when this is going to be a very different example, but it's salient to me of like so I do some like wrestling. So I can if I watch people wrestle, I know the moves. I can see, oh, this is move X, or he's about to do move Y. But my wife, if I show her something, she just sees two people doing stuff, moving, and like, what is this about? But we're watching the same thing. I can just call one thing in a certain term, and I can predict what's going to happen, or predict in some certainty. But she can't. For her, it's totally random. So I mean, with this is partly random and partly I can grab some things. But I find that interesting. I mean, this is the thing when we were talking about Jacob about looking at Torah studies, like for sure there's gonna be things there that on first reading I'm not going to get, right? Like the going over commentaries on the Torah. I'm not gonna get it, but it's gonna expose me at least the first level. I'm gonna recognize it. So when I read it again at the second time, or when I hear somebody else talk about something related, at least a seed is planted. So
just to explain, Ben and I are considering. So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote an anthology called Torah Studies, where he picked one of the Rebbe's sichas. The Rebbe would speak every week on the Parsha, and he was Rebbe for how long was the Rebbe? 40 years? No, 50 years. I don't remember. Anyway, so he picked one for each Parsha, and he translated it to English and abridged it so that the book Torah Studies, I'm actually, it's out of print, and it's really hard to get old copies. But partially that's because it's available for free on Chabad's website. And if you really want, and what most people do is they print it out. And he takes it and he takes beautiful ideas and he shows it. But what Ben and I were talking about was actually digging up the actual Sikha, where the Rebbe and like the Rebbe speaks at a level with like he brings like from Talmud and Midrash and commentaries, and like these are very intense questions, and like learning one of these sikhas which Rabbi Sachs took and abridged into like a page or two, like it can take hours just to learn that one sikha, and like that's if you have the background. Without the background, it might take us several sessions to get through just one of the sikhas. So yeah, but Ben said he wanted to do top shelf stuff, and because when we were talking about Exodus, right, I was like, it bothers me so much that Dennis Prager is there instead of Rabbi Breitowitz, because I feel like if Rabbi Breitowitz was there, he would just like open up the spigots of Torah and like just flood the room, right? And I was like, okay, I want to grab some like top shelf Torah on Exodus, and so yeah, this is what we were thinking of doing. Yeah.
If you
These
do
guys
that,
should
I have
do
to
it.
tell my ex about it. He'll want to know what you're up to and listen to it.
When's it starting?
It's up to Ben.
Ben, when's it starting?
I should read it. I was reading. I read the introduction, but yeah, because but I think we'll do it soon, because I'm up for it. So I would love to do it. One thing that was interesting, Sandy, that you said, and this is on the same point, but I found it really interesting because I think about it. You mentioned how you read the book, and then it's a cause for discussion with your ex. So I mean that's really interesting in terms of like maybe that's related also to your comment about holiness or how you participate in it. It's like you plan, even though you don't like you read the book and you don't necessarily understand what it, let's say you don't understand what it means, but then in a conversation that's not even related to that book, something from that book comes up to you, and that kind of like influences your interaction with that person or another person. And I love that relationship, and the kind of that makes me think about how important it is for you to be kind of like to expose yourself to those kind of things, because then they influenced all your interactions afterwards. Even if you don't understand how they're going to do it, there is somehow going to relate themselves. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that's often just so missing is like just allowing ourselves that freedom to take something like this and actually have a conversation. I mean, I've since joining the channel, I've talked to my sister about it, and I've talked to, I've mentioned to the people that I say go to church, but I actually haven't had enough. I'm a terrible person in a sense, because when I had to go back to work, I work retail, so I gave them every single weekend. So I only get to go to church on the days they have me do closing shifts on Sunday. And, I usually just work whatever they need. You know, I mean, I went in today on my day off because we have an inspection tomorrow, and it's you know, it's okay. It's time to think, you know, and time to process stuff. So, and then I was talking on CRC Voices a bunch of times about the fact I'm reading Halakhic Man, you know, and yeah, I've actually kind of brought it up quite a lot. Yeah, and the thing, you know, the interesting thing about talking to my ex about it is he's always been somebody who likes to dig into things. He says I'm good at research. Should have gone into that. You know, that kind of goes to that, how to figure out how to find the phone number to find the wheelchair seat back, you know, or how to find the library book somewhere that my library's like, well, we don't know if we'll find it. And I'm like, you will. I'm going to tell you where. It's part of a dynamic, like just knowing that you can reach beyond ourselves to possibilities. Yeah, there's something very important about the possibility of, you know, if I talk to my ex the next time, that it could come up again. You know, you know, like, it's not like I say, here's the book, now sit down, you're going to read it to me. I mean, that would be a stupid approach. But he's talked about so many things that are important to him and things he's thinking about, because we're talking about a book he's not even reading. You know, that to me is really interesting. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Sorry, Elijah. You were going to take us somewhere.
No, I don't think so. But
Okay.
Yeah, you said earlier that you feel like more like homo religiosus, right? Or what, if that's how you pronounce it. And
Yeah, I felt a little convicted reading a few of the descriptions.
like,
Going,
hey, I don't like how you're describing me accurately and then putting me down like that. Yeah, well, I guess it's kind of interesting on 13, where he talks about how like the religious person doesn't view reality as uniform and monochromatic, but rather pluralistic and multi-layered. How do you think that this works with, I mean, I'm assuming that you're still a Christian, right? And so how do you think it feels when you engage in something like this that's kind of foreign and different? Like, I'm somebody who, I'm not a Christian anymore, if I ever even was one. So for me, I'm kind of like, up in the air. But for you, how does it feel? Like, is it, oh, it's pluralistic, or?
no, what do you mean by pluralistic? Like,
Yeah, so like, I mean, like, do you see it as like this is an equally valid way of like interacting with the world, or
the
do you
book?
think that it's wrong or different? Yeah.
When I just talked about feeling kind of convicted by it, like when you talk about how homo religiosus is not monochromatic. My ex is more monochromatic. He's very like cognitive man. He got me through cognitive psych because he thinks in tangible structures. He would relate very much to what Ben said about being able to see the wrestling moves, ahead of time, ahead of them happening, because you've got a pattern. You know the pattern, so you know how the pattern's going to play out. And me, I tend to be very back in the day when some of the our church was doing seeker sensitive studies and worship and all of those things. Yeah, some of some of his descriptions of my processing of things reminds me a lot of some of the who kind of like the interesting discussions that are going on over on the other discussion board with like with the CRC Voices. It's kind of like I'm not monochromatic. I'm an artist. I write. I think in examples and stories. I pictured, some of the stuff with my son in things, and I think this fits very well with who I am. Oh, I'm not, and I was never a Christian the same way my sister was a Christian. My mom was a legal secretary, so was my sister briefly for a while, and she's a piano teacher. Very, like you measure things out, you work to plan, you keep things in a pattern, and I tend to go a lot on instinct, and like just kind of you make this leap from here to there, and like you don't worry about the 6 steps, like stones you missed, you could have stepped on in the middle, you just leap. I basically became a Christian at Bible camp, having an argument with God about why I didn't think I should, and went back in and told the camp directors, okay, fine, because I'd had an argument with God about it, and couldn't quite let go of the argument. So like, I must have done something interesting, because my sister told me 30 years later, my cute little, very simple, no, she's not. She's a sweetheart and she's very intelligent, but she's much gentler than me in some ways. And she said she became a Christian the next year because she decided to watch me the whole year, without saying anything to me, and basically check up on me and see if it improved my personality or any other fine qualities or anything. Younger sibling. I'm the oldest. You get the drill from everybody below you. So she saw something in how I approach stuff. I don't even know with that if it's the same thing as what you're asking me, because like my ex was like a Christian, attending church for years, because he thinks through the theological points that he believes, and he bases his decision on a series of theological points and conclusions he's come to. And I mean, I've spent the last 6 years avoiding church and asking myself, every once in a while, like if I was sitting and talking to you, I might say, something to Jesus because I'm talking to him because I think he exists, but I never particularly prayed to him the way everybody else in my church did. So like, I don't know, like every time I would be at church, I'm talking to God. I'm thinking about God as God. I know what we believe. I can stand and say the creeds and all those things. I'm not sure how to answer your question, whether it's changed me, because I mean, I've answered it with a lot of words, but I don't know if it's an answer that makes sense to your question. So feel free to re-ask it if it doesn't.
No, I mean, I think you answered it in the way that you needed or wanted to answer it, so I think it's sufficient. What about you, Ben, coming from secular places? How's your kind of opinion on that kind of pluralism versus monism?
Yeah. It's hard for me to pinpoint, like to think of myself, like to pinpoint myself on that. I think I think I would be closer to the cognitive man, or that would be my kind of like my starting point. Let's call it that was my default. That's where I kind of that was my perspective. I think that, so in terms of pluralism, in terms of like right, it's not just this world. So I'm trying to define for myself these terms of like, it's not just this world. It's not just what I see with my eyes. It's also something more ephemeral, or it's something more like above, right? I find myself that even trying to talk to my wife about it, how I need to, who is less, let's say, less inclined to have this kind of like more of a kind of religious thinking is that it's a harder move to think about that other world that you don't see. I mean, it's definitely a harder move, or it almost feels not what's the word for that? Like maybe for some people it will feel, maybe for the religious man it feels like this is like the basis, the first one that I need to think about. And for me, it's almost like, I guess when I'm talking to her about it, if I talk to other secular people, it almost feels like it's indulgent to think about the other one. I don't know if indulgent is the right word, but it's like I'm adding something that's additional that is unclear how and why it's helpful to bring that up. So I'm kind of still in that kind of trying to, and I do feel like that the loving that, or like having that relationship with God, with that, which is basically saying that relationship with that other world, is the only way to do that. Instead of saying it's just necessary, it's not that I can't. I feel like I can't tell myself that it's necessary, or if I tell myself it's necessary, it's actually I'm just thinking like a cognitive man. It's really the relationship. Like I want to have this, or it's something that's that I love to do, is what feels more authentic for me. Um, yeah, it's hard to think about though. I don't know.
Yeah, I do think it's difficult. That I feel like every chapter is another question raised for sure.
Yeah, do you have a sense of that? You were
Yeah, I don't know. I guess like my upbringing is kind of confused. So I would say that in some regards, like it was pluralistic in generality. Um, and so I don't know if I could even make a distinction. I didn't have the mm, like just a pure kind of physicality of being raised secular, but then I also didn't almost like fully accept religiosity in a way to like posit different worlds. And even now I'm still unsure. So yeah, I guess that's kind of why I asked the question, right? Two different people, two different directions, and then me kind of floating, trying to understand.
So when you talk about from like basing it against what you just shared from your life about pluralism, are you meaning in terms of, or what are you meaning in terms of that? Like in terms of how it.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that I had like Roman Catholic influences, I had general Protestant influences, like very kind of waspy Protestant influences. I had Jewish influences, I had secular influences, I had New Age influences, I
Yeah.
had like militant atheist influences. And so when you have all these things come together, you're just really confused. And so you're like, well, this person sees something this way, and this person sees something this way. And so like what's real? Yeah. So that kind of, yeah, that's where like I come from.
So I'll give you another answer too then. I remember I spent some time in a parachurch ministry that would be slightly with, well, not more, a little more than slightly to the Pentecostal side, where they're talking about we'll get in, they'd get into the whole Trinitarian thing, where they're speaking to that mostly abandoned, although always mentioned, Christian context of God's Spirit. So in the Pentecostals really get into this whole sense of what did happen in Acts, and why did people see flames of fire on the heads of the people, and were they speaking in tongues, because it says that they were all talking in different languages. But one of the things that this group was talking about was that they were saying, well, and they also were very good at digging into theology, the particular person that was running it, and saying that you don't just say stuff, you look up reasons why and where you find it, right? But they would talk about things of saying that you can't just assume something was of God simply because it's interesting or simply because it was, like, so you pray for somebody, and you're praying for healing. Well, if you say, oh, I absolutely know that God has told me that so and so is going to get healed, and you never see any evidence of that, well, then they kind of go, you've missed one of at least 4 steps. It's like, because they would say, does it sync with what God would have said in the Bible? Like, is this something you would find somewhere in the Bible that this could happen? So they'd have criteria. So even in a sense of where I've had a whole lot of different influences feeding into me, I didn't answer the question that way, understanding what you were asking, because it all comes down to, what do I like? I look and I read in the Bible. I've been doing, like Jacob suggested. I've been treating some of it as liturgy. I'll say the Lord's Prayer because I remember that from growing up, and Psalm 23 because I've loved that. For some reason, I always repeat Genesis 1. I love talking about in the beginning, and like I don't have a concept of what the beginning is, like not until the end of time will I have a concept of what the beginning was, like but that doesn't scare me. I relate a lot of things in my faith life, I think, honestly grew possibly bigger than it would have by having my oldest son that had all of the, it's like God said, so you like puzzles, here's a puzzle. And he really was. And I like, and John's right, I do enjoy research. I always loved the, follow the dot things and different. I like puzzles. I like questions. I love doctors that are curious, and I loved reading Jacob's conversation on the Discord, and saying, like, I can't remember the word, but when you go to get examined, it's not about proving, oh, I have to prove I know things. It's about saying, no, I don't know the answer to that. And I'm like, that is one of the most honest places to engage with God, of saying, or anybody else. Like, I mean, I will get on these talk things, and I'll be probably honest to point of where why are you even saying these things? But I'd rather be slightly over honest, or a little too vulnerable, than trying to hide things and look perfect, because I'm not going to. And there is no point to that. I think really to be able to say when I don't know something, or something has scared me or stumped me, or I've given it my best shot and I still have no clue what I'm doing. I think that in all of the things that I went through with my son are the places and things where I most respected people who were far more educated than me, because they were willing to say, oh, I don't know about this. And I'm like, oh, good, you're curious. You want to know more than you know now. You want to know about something. That's kind of where I come from, in that place where you're kind of going, I don't have any, I don't know. I don't have any proof for some of the stuff I believe. I just walk it out, and I might see evidences of God along the way. I really look for those places,
Okay. Now I have to tell the story of the rocket jumper, so people who are listening know what we're talking about.
Okay.
The Rogachover was known to be a very stern and harsh and exacting rabbi. And people really were very, people would go to him to get tested to become a rabbi, because like everybody knew that if he gave you smicha, if he ordained you, like, because he was known to ask really difficult questions, and he did not suffer fools, and he was famous for this. And he gave Dayanut, which is the highest level of rabbinic ordination, to the Rebbe, and that's something that like Chabad Hasidim to this day, like they're like, yeah, the Rebbe got Dayanut from the Rogachover, because that's like, I remember I was teaching 7th grade, and I told one of my students, I told my class that the Rebbe got Dayanut from the Rogachover, and one of the students who came from a very Litvish background, from a not Hasidic background, said, "From the Rogachover? I don't believe it." And anyway, so famously, somebody who was not the brightest guy, bulb in the drawer, came to the Rogachover and wanted to be ordained. And every question the Rogachover asked him, he said, I don't know, but we have some very smart, wise rabbis in my city. And I will ask them and they will know. And the Rogachover ordained him as a rabbi. And people asked, like, how could you do that? And apparently the story goes that the Rogachover said, he's the most qualified person I've ordained yet. He at least knows he doesn't know.
Yeah, I can only see how it's also a case for like collective intelligence of like, I don't know it, but I have friends that know this. So the better community you have, better your intelligence. It depends on your community, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, Sandy, I don't think you or Ben answered the question incorrectly or in a way that I wasn't asking. I just think that, like, for me, yeah, I just didn't have a good answer to my own question. So, yeah. Anything else anybody wants to say, or we can wrap this up and give the next section?
I hope you told yourself I don't know, but I know some people I could ask.
I guess that's what the point of the book club is, right? All right. Well, I was thinking that we can read from page 30 to page 48. Should be about 18 pages. And then we can have our next meeting on the 16th of February.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Any objections?
We've only dipped our toes in. With all these big reading pieces, does this mean we get to repeat the book again next year?
We're gonna do a cycle. It's gonna be an annual cycle.
An annual cycle.
Yeah.
Some people have to repeat the Torah. We have to repeat the Halakhic Man. It's not. I think after this, we'll only have like 100-ish pages to go. So
Easy.
Easy. Just a few more months and we'll be halfway.
And while you guys are reading, if you have questions about like stuff he's saying, like you have no idea what the word Hallel means, like you can ask on the Discord server.
That's probably a really good idea, isn't it?
Well, at least for the Hebrew stuff, like, yeah, like I don't expect you to know what Hallel is. Although I'm guessing Elijah and Ben know what Hallel is.
Yeah, I ain't no hollow back girl.
What?
There you
I
go.
have no idea what you just said. I just keep thinking.
Absolute nonsense. So that's why it was good. That's right.
I was going to say, is it in any particular respect related to the praise, like hallelujah, or is it? Because then I'm thinking that's how same as the Defil sign celebration or kind of. So I'm like, yeah, okay.
Hallel is a specific segment towards the end of the Book of Psalms that are said on joyous occasions. So
Ah,
Yes. On holidays.
yes.
Holy.
Unless there's anything else, I will end this broadcast. I think I'm going to do a just chatting stream like in half an hour or so. So if people just want to show up to chat, they can. Otherwise, we're going to land this plane, as Paul Vanderclay would say.
might pop in and listen to a half hour or so